Admiral Lee Dong-Soo stood on the bridge of the diplomatic vessel Terra's Voice and watched the massive Valdorian homeworld grow larger on the main screen. The planet looked like a giant red marble with swirling orange clouds that reminded him of old Earth paintings of hell. He had been in space for 30 years, but this world made him feel uneasy in a way he could not explain. Ambassador Park Ji-woo walked up beside him and smoothed down her formal diplomatic uniform. She was one of the best negotiators humanity had ever produced, and her success rate in alien contact was perfect. Today would be her biggest test yet, because the Valdorian Empire controlled half the outer rim, and humanity needed their friendship to expand further into space. The scans show their capital city has over 50 million inhabitants, said Dr. Kim Tae-jin as he looked up from his research console. He was the team's expert on alien cultures and had spent months studying what little information they had about Valdorian society. Their architecture seems to focus on tall spires and what look like ceremonial platforms in the city center. Captain Yoon Hae-won checked her security readings one more time and frowned. She had been responsible for protecting diplomatic missions for 8 years, and something about this planet bothered her. The Valdorians had been polite in their communications, but there was a coldness in their messages that made her want to keep her weapon close. Their military ships are keeping their distance, but they have at least 20 vessels escorting us, she reported to Admiral Lee. Standard protocol for a first contact situation, but they are heavily armed for a peaceful meeting. The Terra's Voice entered the atmosphere and began its descent toward the designated landing area outside the Valdorian capital. Through the viewports, they could see the alien city sprawling in all directions with its strange red buildings and towering spires that reached toward the dark sky. The ceremonial platforms Dr. Kim had mentioned were clearly visible as large circular areas surrounded by steep stone steps. "Those platforms look like amphitheaters," said Ambassador Park as she studied the layout below. "Maybe they use them for public ceremonies or entertainment." Captain Yoon did not like the look of the platforms at all. They reminded her of ancient execution sites she had studied in military history, but she kept that thought to herself. There was no point in making everyone nervous before they even landed. The ship touched down on a flat area of black stone that had been prepared for their arrival. Hundreds of Valdorian citizens had gathered to watch the historic first meeting between their species and humanity. The aliens were tall and thin with pale blue skin and large black eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They wore dark robes and stood in perfect rows without talking or moving. Admiral Lee led the diplomatic team down the landing ramp and toward the group of official Valdorians who waited for them. The alien delegation was led by a figure who wore more elaborate robes and carried a staff made from some kind of black metal. This had to be King Morveth himself based on the intelligence reports they had received. "Welcome to Valdros Prime," said King Morveth in heavily accented but understandable English. His voice was deep and carried an authority that made everyone listen carefully. "I am King Morveth, the third ruler of the Valdorian Empire and keeper of traditional ways." Ambassador Park stepped forward and gave the formal diplomatic greeting that had been approved by the United Earth government. "Your Majesty, I am Ambassador Park Ji-woo representing humanity and the United Earth colonies. We come in peace seeking friendship and mutual understanding between our peoples." King Morveth looked at Ambassador Park for a long moment, and his black eyes seemed to study every detail of her appearance. Behind him, several other Valdorian officials whispered among themselves in their own language. Dr. Kim tried to pick up what they were saying, but their words were too quiet and fast to understand. "You may accompany me to the Palace of Eternal Order," said King Morveth finally. "We will discuss the future of relations between your species and mine." The procession through the capital city took almost an hour as they traveled in ceremonial vehicles that hovered a few feet above the ground. Captain Yoon noticed armed guards at every street corner and surveillance devices mounted on most buildings. The Valdorian citizens they passed all stopped what they were doing to watch the humans go by, but none of them showed any emotion or made any gestures. "Very disciplined society," whispered Dr. Kim to Admiral Lee. "Almost like a military state, where everyone follows strict rules about public behavior." The Palace of Eternal Order was a massive structure made from the same red stone as the rest of the city, but covered with intricate carvings and symbols. Inside the walls were decorated with what looked like historical scenes, showing Valdorian victories over other alien species. Ambassador Park made mental notes about everything she saw, because these details would be important for future negotiations. King Morveth led them to a large hall where a formal dinner had been prepared. The food was mostly vegetables and fruits that had been grown on the planet, along with synthetic proteins that tasted similar to Earth meat. During the meal, King Morveth asked many questions about human society and government. "Your ambassador is female," King Morveth observed as servants brought the next course. "This is unusual for a species that claims to be advanced." Ambassador Park smiled diplomatically and explained that humans believed in equality between males and females. "Our society functions best when everyone can contribute their talents regardless of gender," she said. "Some of our greatest leaders, scientists, and warriors have been women." King Morveth nodded, but his expression remained neutral. Several of his advisors exchanged looks that Captain Yoon did not like. She made a mental note to review their security protocols before the next meeting. Dr. Kim presented gifts from Earth, including samples of human art, music, and literature. King Morveth accepted them politely but seemed more interested in technical information about human military capabilities and industrial production. The conversation gradually shifted toward trade agreements and territorial boundaries. "The Valdorian Empire would be willing to establish limited trade relations," said King Morveth after several hours of discussion. "However, we must ensure that human influence does not corrupt our traditional values and social order." Ambassador Park assured him that humans respected alien cultures and had no desire to interfere with Valdorian society. They only wanted peaceful cooperation that would benefit both civilizations. By the end of the evening, preliminary agreements had been reached for cultural exchanges and economic cooperation. As they returned to their ship, Admiral Lee felt cautiously optimistic about the mission. The Valdorians seemed stern and rigid, but they appeared to be reasonable beings who could be trusted to honor their agreements. Ambassador Park was pleased with the progress they had made in just one day. Captain Yoon remained alert as they walked back through the dark city streets. Something about the way King Morveth had looked at the human women bothered her, but she could not put her finger on exactly what it was. The mission had been successful, but she would be glad when they were safely back in human space. Dr. Kim was already planning his cultural report about Valdorian society. He had observed many interesting details about their social structure and religious beliefs that would help future diplomatic missions. The Valdorians clearly valued order and tradition above everything else. None of them realized that King Morveth was watching their ship from his palace window as they prepared to depart. In his mind, the sight of human females in positions of authority was an insult to everything he believed about proper social order. The seeds of future conflict had already been planted even as both sides celebrated their diplomatic success. 3 months after the successful first contact, Ambassador Park Ji-woo returned to Valdros Prime with a much larger delegation to finalize the trade agreements. The second mission included 43 humans with expertise in various fields from engineering to medicine. Among them were 15 women who held important positions in the diplomatic and technical teams. Colonel Choi Min-ho served as the military attaché for the expanded mission and had reviewed all security protocols multiple times. Engineer Song Ye-jin led the technical assessment team that would evaluate Valdorian manufacturing capabilities. Both were experienced professionals who had worked on dozens of similar missions throughout human space. Admiral Lee Dong-soo remained in command of the expanded fleet that now included 3 ships instead of just the original Terra's Voice. The additional vessels carried scientific equipment and trade samples that would demonstrate human technological capabilities to their potential new allies. King Morveth received the larger delegation with the same formal courtesy as before, but something had changed in his demeanor. Dr. Kim noticed that the Valdorian ruler seemed more tense during their initial meetings and often stared at the human women with an expression that was difficult to interpret. "Your second delegation includes many more females in positions of authority," King Morveth observed during their first formal dinner. "This continues to puzzle me about your species." Ambassador Park explained again that human society had evolved beyond gender-based restrictions. Our women serve as scientists, engineers, doctors, and military officers just like our men, she said. We have found that this approach allows us to utilize all available talent. Engineer Song Ye-jin added her own perspective about technological advancement. Many of our greatest innovations have come from female researchers and inventors, she said. Gender equality has been one of the key factors in human scientific progress. King Morveth listened to these explanations, but his black eyes remained cold and calculating. Behind him, his advisors whispered constantly in their own language, and their body language suggested growing agitation. Dr. Kim tried to follow their conversations, but could only catch fragments about traditional values and corruption of natural order. Over the following days, the human delegation worked closely with Valdorian officials to establish the framework for ongoing cooperation. Engineer Song and her team toured Valdorian manufacturing facilities, while medical staff exchanged information about treatments for various diseases. The technical exchanges went smoothly, but the social interactions remained strained. Captain Yoon Hae-won noticed increasing security presence around their accommodations and more surveillance during their movements through the city. When she mentioned this to Colonel Choi, he agreed that the Valdorians seemed to be taking unusual precautions for what was supposed to be a friendly diplomatic mission. Their guards are positioned like they expect trouble, Colonel Choi observed. Either they are worried about their own people or they are planning something themselves. The breakthrough in negotiations came when Ambassador Park successfully negotiated terms for technology sharing that would benefit both civilizations. The Valdorians would provide rare minerals needed for human starship construction, while humans would share medical and agricultural advances. Both sides seemed satisfied with the arrangement. King Morveth announced that a ceremonial signing would take place in the main plaza where the ancient platforms were located. He said this would demonstrate to all Valdorian citizens that their government had secured valuable new partnerships with an advanced alien species. On the morning of the ceremony, thousands of Valdorian citizens gathered in the plaza to witness the historic event. The human delegation took their places on the ceremonial platform, while King Morveth and his officials arranged themselves according to traditional protocols. Ambassador Park had prepared remarks about friendship between their peoples and the bright future that lay ahead for both civilizations. Engineer Song carried the technical specifications that would be shared as part of the agreements. Everything seemed to be proceeding according to plan. King Morveth began the ceremony with a long speech in the Valdorian language that Dr. Kim could only partially understand. The alien ruler spoke about tradition and proper order and the importance of maintaining cultural purity. His voice grew more passionate as he continued, and the crowd responded with increasing enthusiasm. Then suddenly King Morveth switched to English, so the humans could understand his words. The Valdorian Empire has observed the corruption that comes from abandoning natural law, he declared. We have seen how alien influence can poison a civilization by promoting unnatural practices. Ambassador Park looked confused and exchanged glances with Admiral Lee, who was watching from the edge of the platform. Something in King Morveth's tone had changed from diplomatic courtesy to hostile judgment. The most dangerous corruption is the elevation of females to positions of authority over males, King Morveth continued. This violation of natural order weakens a species and makes them vulnerable to conquest by those who maintain proper discipline. Captain Yoon reached for her weapon but found herself surrounded by Valdorian guards who had moved into position during the speech. Colonel Choi also found his path blocked by armed aliens who seemed to have anticipated any resistance. To demonstrate the consequences of such corruption, King Morveth announced to the crowd, "We will cleanse these aliens of their unnatural practices and show our people what happens to those who abandon traditional ways." The ceremonial platforms that Dr. Kim had thought were amphitheaters revealed their true purpose as execution sites. Hidden mechanisms raised wooden posts with rope nooses that had been prepared in advance. The entire ceremony had been planned as a trap to eliminate the human women who represented everything King Morveth despised about alien influence. Ambassador Park tried to speak, but Valdorian guards seized her and the other human women before they could react. Engineer Song struggled against her captors while demanding to know why they were being treated as criminals instead of honored guests. Admiral Lee shouted protests and threatened retaliation, but King Morveth ignored him completely. The Valdorian ruler was focused entirely on his demonstration of cultural superiority over what he saw as corrupted alien values. Your females will die to show our people that the Valdorian way is the correct way, King Morveth declared. Their deaths will prove that aliens who abandon natural order cannot stand against those who maintain traditional strength. One by one, the human women were forced onto the execution platforms, while the Valdorian crowd cheered their approval. Ambassador Park maintained her dignity even facing death and refused to beg for mercy that would not come. Engineer Song continued to demand explanations that no one would provide. Captain Yoon looked directly at Admiral Lee and nodded once to show she understood this was not his fault. All the human women faced their deaths with courage that impressed even their executioners. They had come as diplomats and scientists, but they would die as martyrs to Valdorian hatred. The executions were broadcast throughout Valdorian space, as King Morveth wanted all his subjects to see the consequences of adopting alien values. The images of human women dying with dignity, while alien crowds celebrated, would soon reach human space and change everything. Admiral Lee and the surviving male delegation members were forced to watch the entire execution before being expelled from Valdorian territory. King Morveth wanted them to carry the message back to human space that the Valdorian Empire would not tolerate corruption of natural order. As the Terra's voice limped away from Valdros Prime with its reduced crew, Admiral Lee stared at the recording of the executions that King Morveth had given him as a warning. The Valdorian ruler had made the greatest mistake in his civilization's history by awakening something in humanity that had been sleeping since their ancient wars. The diplomatic mission that was supposed to bring peace between two civilizations had instead lit the fuse for a war that would consume the entire galaxy. King Morveth believed he had demonstrated Valdorian strength, but he had actually signed his empire's death warrant by murdering innocent human women who had come in peace. The Terra's voice arrived at Earth 3 weeks after the executions, and Admiral Lee Dong-soo walked slowly down the landing ramp, carrying the burden of terrible news. His face had aged years in the days since he watched Ambassador Park Ji-woo and 14 other human women die for the crime of being female diplomats in an alien culture that hated them. President Han Soo-bin waited at the spaceport with her entire cabinet and the leaders of the United Earth Defense Forces. She took one look at Admiral Lee's expression and knew that something had gone horribly wrong with what was supposed to be a routine diplomatic mission to finalize trade agreements. "Madam President," Admiral Lee said quietly, "I must report the murder of Ambassador Park and 14 other members of our delegation by King Morveth of the Valdorian Empire." The silence that followed his words seemed to stretch forever, as the implications sank in for everyone present. General Nam Woo-jin stepped forward and asked for details, while Admiral Ko Hyun-sik demanded to know if this was an act of war against humanity. Admiral Lee handed over the recording that King Morveth had given him, and explained how the ceremonial signing had been a trap designed to execute the human women as examples of corrupted alien values. He described how Ambassador Park had maintained her dignity even facing death, and how Captain Yoon had shown no fear as the noose tightened around her neck. President Han watched the execution footage in complete silence, while her advisors argued about appropriate responses and diplomatic protests. When the recording ended, she stood up and walked to the window overlooking the spaceport, where families were still waiting to welcome home delegation members who would never return. "This is not a matter for diplomatic protests," she said finally. "This is murder of our citizens under the protection of diplomatic immunity. King Morveth has declared war on humanity itself." Within hours, news of the executions spread throughout human space, and the reaction was unlike anything in recorded history. Every human colony, every political faction, every corporate entity, and every military unit responded with the same demand for justice. The murder of innocent women diplomats had awakened something primal in the human psyche. Dr. Lim Bo-ra worked around the clock with her strategic planning team to assess human military capabilities versus the Valdorian Empire. For decades, humanity had maintained defensive forces designed to protect their territory, but had never prepared for a war of conquest against a major galactic power. "We have been underestimating our own strength," she reported to President Han and the Defense Council. "Our industrial capacity exceeds Valdorian production by 3 to 1, and our technology is more advanced in critical areas like weapons systems and starship design." General Nam presented mobilization plans that would convert the entire human economy to military production within 6 months. Every shipyard would build warships, every factory would produce weapons, and every research facility would develop new technologies for the coming conflict. Admiral Ko began recalling every human military unit from patrol duties and training exercises. The largest fleet in human history would be assembled for the invasion of Valdorian space. No expense would be spared, and no effort would be considered too great to ensure victory. The Galactic Federation attempted to intervene with offers of mediation and peaceful resolution, but President Han rejected all such proposals. She addressed the Federation Council directly via subspace communication, and her words left no doubt about human intentions. "The Valdorian Empire murdered 15 innocent human women who came to them in peace seeking friendship and cooperation," she declared. "These women were scientists, engineers, doctors, and diplomats who represented the best of humanity. Their deaths demand justice, not mediation." Species that had known humans as peaceful traders and diplomatic partners watched in amazement as humanity transformed itself into a war machine. Factories that had produced consumer goods were retooled for military equipment. Civilian ships were converted to military transports. Research programs were redirected toward weapons development. The execution footage of Ambassador Park and her colleagues became a rallying cry that united humanity like never before. Political parties that had opposed each other for decades joined together in demanding vengeance. Corporate executives donated their entire production capacity to the war effort. Young people enlisted in numbers that overwhelmed military recruitment centers. Admiral Lee requested command of the first strike force that would attack Valdorian territory. He carried personal responsibility for failing to protect the women under his command and wanted to lead the mission that would avenge their deaths. President Han approved his request because she understood the need for personal justice. Dr. Kim Tae-jin provided intelligence about Valdorian military capabilities and social structure that would be crucial for planning the invasion. His cultural analysis suggested that the Valdorian Empire was more fragile than it appeared, because many conquered species resented their overlords and might welcome liberation. Engineer teams worked 24 hours a day developing new weapons specifically designed to counter Valdorian technology. The same innovative spirit that had built human civilization would now be turned toward destroying an empire that had made the mistake of murdering human women. Captain Yoon's security protocols were studied and improved to ensure that future military operations would be better prepared for alien treachery. Her sacrifice would save lives in the battles to come, as human forces learned from the mistakes that had cost their comrades their lives. President Han made one final attempt at diplomacy by sending a message directly to King Morveth demanding the surrender of everyone involved in the executions and full reparations for the murdered women. The Valdorian ruler responded by broadcasting the execution footage again and declaring that humanity was too weak to threaten the mighty Valdorian Empire. That response sealed the fate of every Valdorian military installation and government facility in the galaxy. Humanity had offered one last chance for peace, and King Morveth had chosen war instead. Now he would learn why human women like Ambassador Park and Engineer Song had been able to accomplish so much in their short lives. The first human battle fleets departed from Earth 6 months after the executions, carrying weapons and equipment that represented centuries of human scientific advancement. Admiral Lee stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked out at the largest armada humanity had ever assembled. Every ship in the fleet carried the names of the executed women painted on their hulls. Admiral Lee's dreadnought bore the name Ambassador Park Jiwoo in letters 10 feet tall. The message was clear to everyone who saw them coming. General Nam remained on Earth coordinating the massive logistical effort needed to support military operations across thousands of light years. His planning staff had calculated that humanity could maintain this level of military production for at least 10 years if necessary to completely destroy the Valdorian Empire. Dr. Lim's strategic analysis indicated that the war would be won or lost in the first year, depending on how quickly human forces could penetrate Valdorian defenses and begin liberating conquered species. Speed and overwhelming force would be the keys to victory. As the human fleets jumped to hyperspace, President Han addressed the nation one final time before the shooting began. She stood before a memorial wall displaying images of all 15 murdered women and spoke words that would be remembered for generations. They came in peace-seeking friendship between civilizations, she said. They died because they were women in a culture that hated them for their gender. Today we go to war not for conquest but for justice. The galaxy will remember that humanity protects its own. Admiral Lee Dong-soo stood on the command bridge of his dreadnought Ambassador Park Ji-woo as the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Valdorian territory. Before them lay the first major military installation that protected the outer rim of King Morveth's empire. The massive space station bristled with weapons and was surrounded by patrol ships that had detected the approaching human armada. Captain Shin Jae-ho commanded the dreadnought Righteous Fury and positioned his ship alongside Admiral Lee's flagship. Both vessels carried the latest human weapons technology, including plasma cannons that could melt through Valdorian armor plating and missile systems guided by artificial intelligence that made them nearly impossible to intercept. All ships report ready for combat, announced Lieutenant Baek Sung-min from the communications station. Fleet composition includes 47 capital ships, 130 destroyers, and over 300 support vessels. Total crew. Strength is 200,000 personnel. Major Park Gi-tae led the special forces units that would board and capture key Valdorian installations once the main battle was won. His soldiers had trained for months specifically for combat against Valdorian troops and carried weapons designed to counter alien armor and tactics. Commander Oh Yoon-ji served as tactical officer aboard Admiral Lee's flagship and had survived the original diplomatic mission by remaining on the Terra's Voice during the execution ceremony. She had volunteered for this combat assignment to honor the memory of Captain Yoon and the other women who had died on Valdros Prime. The Valdorian commander sent a warning message demanding that the human fleet withdraw from Imperial territory immediately or face destruction. Admiral Lee ordered Lieutenant Baek to transmit the human response which had been prepared months ago during the planning phase. This is Admiral Lee Dong-soo of the United Earth Defense Forces, the message began. We come to seek justice for the murder of Ambassador Park Ji-woo and 14 other innocent human women. Surrender your weapons and prepare to be taken into custody or we will destroy your installation. The Valdorian response was predictable. Energy beams lanced out from the space station toward the human fleet while alien fighters swarmed from hidden launch bays. The Battle of Valdros Station had begun and would demonstrate to the galaxy that humanity was no longer the peaceful trading partner they had known for generations. Captain Shin's dreadnought absorbed the first Valdorian attack on its forward shields while returning fire with plasma cannons that carved through the alien station's outer hull. Human fighters launched from carrier ships and engaged the Valdorian interceptors in dogfights that filled space with explosions and debris. Commander Oh coordinated the tactical assault from her position on the flagship bridge. Her analysis of Valdorian defensive patterns allowed human ships to concentrate their fire on weak points while avoiding the most heavily defended sections of the enemy installation. Target their command center with concentrated missile strikes, she ordered. Secondary targets include power generation facilities and fighter launch bays. We want to disable their ability to coordinate resistance. The battle lasted only 4 hours before the Valdorian station commander requested terms of surrender. His defensive force had been decimated by human weapons that proved superior in both range and destructive power. The survivors faced capture or death as human boarding parties prepared to secure the facility. Major Park led his special forces troops through the breached sections of the alien station, while Valdorian defenders fell back toward their command center. The human soldiers showed professional competence but no mercy toward enemies who served the government that had murdered their female diplomats. We have secured the main communications array, Major Park reported to Admiral Lee. The Valdorian commander is requesting permission to evacuate his remaining personnel before we take control of critical systems. Admiral Lee denied the evacuation request and ordered all surviving Valdorian military personnel taken prisoner. They would be held for war crimes trials related to their support of King Morveth's regime. Only civilian technicians would be allowed to leave safely. The capture of Valdros Station provided humanity with intelligence about Valdorian military capabilities and strategic planning that would prove invaluable for future battles. Dr. Kim's cultural analysis had been correct that the alien empire was more vulnerable than it appeared. News of the human victory spread quickly through both human and Valdorian space. Species that had been conquered by the Valdorian Empire began to hope that liberation might be possible, while King Morveth realized that he faced an enemy more dangerous than he had imagined. Admiral Ko Hyun-sik led the second human fleet to attack the industrial world of Valdros Secondary, where much of the alien empire's military equipment was manufactured. His assault force included specialized ships designed to bombard planetary targets while protecting civilian populations from unnecessary harm. The orbital bombardment of Valdros Secondary lasted 3 days and completely destroyed every military factory while leaving residential areas largely intact. Human precision targeting demonstrated that their anger was focused specifically on the Valdorian military and government, rather than innocent civilians. Captain Shin received new orders to attack the fortress world of Valdros Tertiary, where King Morveth had positioned his reserve fleets. The battle for this system would determine whether human forces could advance toward the Valdorian capital or would be forced into a prolonged siege campaign. Commander O developed new tactical approaches for each engagement based on lessons learned from previous battles. Her innovations in fleet coordination allowed human ships to overwhelm Valdorian defenses with coordinated attacks that the aliens could not counter effectively. The Battle of Valdros Tertiary proved to be the decisive engagement of the early campaign. King Morveth had committed his best ships and most experienced commanders to defend this critical system. The defeat of these forces would leave the route to Valdros Prime largely undefended. Major Park's commandos captured the planetary defense control center and disabled the automated weapons platforms that protected the fortress world. Without these defenses, the Valdorian fleet was forced to fight the human armada in open space, where superior human technology gave them overwhelming advantages. Lieutenant Bayek intercepted Valdorian communications during the battle and discovered that King Morveth was personally commanding the defense from his flagship. Admiral Lee immediately ordered all human ships to concentrate their fire on the alien ruler's vessel, but King Morveth escaped when his ship was critically damaged. The victory at Valdros Tertiary opened the way for human forces to advance directly toward the Valdorian capital system. King Morveth's empire was collapsing faster than anyone had predicted, as conquered species began rebelling against their Valdorian overlords throughout the Outer Rim territories. Commander O calculated that human losses in the campaign so far amounted to less than 5% of total forces, while Valdorian military capability had been reduced by over 60%. The disparity in casualties demonstrated the technological superiority of human weapons and tactics. Admiral Lee received reports that several Valdorian worlds had surrendered without fighting when human fleets appeared in their systems. The alien populations had heard about human treatment of prisoners and civilians and preferred peaceful occupation to the destruction that would result from resistance. Captain Shin's dreadnought led the advance force toward Valdros Prime, while Admiral Ko's fleet secured the conquered territories and established human administration over liberated worlds. The final assault on King Morveth's capital would require careful planning to ensure the alien ruler could not escape justice. Major Sue Park prepared his special forces for the most important mission of the war. The capture of King Morveth and his advisors who had planned the execution of the human women was the ultimate objective of the entire campaign. Everything else was secondary to bringing the murderers to trial. As the human fleets converged on Valdros Prime, Lieutenant Bayek transmitted the same message that had preceded every battle in the campaign. The words of Ambassador Park Ji-woo and Engineer Song Ye-jin were quoted before each engagement to remind everyone why they were fighting this war across the galaxy. The final assault on Valdros Prime began at dawn on the anniversary of the executions when Admiral Lee Dong-soo ordered his combined fleets to attack the heavily defended capital system. King Morveth had concentrated his remaining military forces around his homeworld in a desperate attempt to prevent human justice from reaching him. Captain Shin Jae-ho positioned the dreadnought Righteous Fury at the center of the human battle formation, while Admiral Ko Hyun-sik coordinated the flanking movements that would surround the planet. The Valdorian defenders fought with the fury of desperation, but their weapons and tactics were no match for human technology and determination. Commander Oh Yoonji directed the tactical assault from her position aboard the flagship Ambassador Park Ji-woo, and watched as Valdorian defense platforms were systematically destroyed by concentrated human firepower. Each explosion brought them closer to the moment when King Morveth would answer for his crimes against innocent women. Major Park Gi-tae led the first wave of assault shuttles toward the planetary surface, while Valdorian fighters tried desperately to intercept them. His Special Forces troops carried weapons specifically designed to capture rather than kill because the war crimes trials required living defendants to face justice for their actions. The battle for orbital control lasted only 6 hours before the last Valdorian warship was destroyed or forced to surrender. Human forces had achieved complete dominance of space around the capital world and could now focus on the ground assault that would capture King Morveth and his advisors. Lieutenant Baek Sung-min intercepted communications from the planetary surface indicating that Valdorian ground forces were abandoning their positions and retreating toward the capital city. Many alien soldiers had decided that protecting their king was not worth dying for when defeat was inevitable. Admiral Lee personally led the ground assault on the Palace of Eternal Order, where King Morveth had barricaded himself with his most loyal guards. The same building where Ambassador Park had dined as an honored guest would now witness the capture of her murderer. The assault on the palace required careful coordination because human forces wanted to minimize damage to the structure that would serve as the courthouse for the war crimes trials. Major Park's commandos used precision charges to breach the outer walls while avoiding the ceremonial halls where justice would soon be served. King Morveth made his final stand in the throne room, surrounded by the advisors who had encouraged him to execute the human women. When human soldiers breached the chamber, they found the Valdorian ruler still wearing his ceremonial robes and clutching the black metal staff that symbolized his authority over a dead empire. "I am King Morveth III, and I demand to be treated according to my royal status," the alien ruler declared as Major Park's troops surrounded him. His black eyes showed no remorse for the murders that had brought destruction to his civilization. Major Park looked at the alien king and remembered watching the execution footage of Ambassador Park and Captain Yoon facing death with dignity while this creature celebrated their murders. "You are a war criminal who will face trial for the murder of 15 innocent human women," he replied. The capture of King Morveth and his advisors marked the effective end of Valdorian resistance throughout their former empire. Human forces had achieved complete victory in less than 1 year of fighting, while liberating dozens of conquered species and bringing justice to the murderers of their diplomatic mission. President Han Soo-bin arrived on Valdros Prime 3 days after the capital fell to personally oversee the establishment of the War Crimes Tribunal. She walked through the same palace halls where Ambassador Park had negotiated in good faith while planning her execution was being finalized. The trial of King Morveth and his co-conspirators was broadcast throughout the galaxy, so every species could witness human justice in action. The defendants were provided with legal counsel and given every opportunity to present their defense, while the evidence of their crimes was methodically presented. Dr. Kim Tae-jin testified about Valdorian culture and explained how the executions had been planned from the beginning as demonstrations of cultural superiority over alien values. His analysis proved that the murders were premeditated rather than spontaneous acts of anger. Admiral Lee took the witness stand and described watching the execution of the women he had failed to protect. His testimony brought tears to the eyes of observers as he explained how Ambassador Park had maintained her dignity even facing death at the hands of alien barbarians. Commander Oh testified about the professional competence of Captain Yoon and the other female officers who had died simply because they were women in positions of authority. Her words reminded everyone that the victims had been among humanity's best and brightest representatives. King Morveth's defense attorneys argued that he had acted according to Valdorian law and cultural traditions, but the tribunal ruled that murder of diplomatic personnel was a crime under galactic law, regardless of local customs. Cultural differences could not justify killing innocent women. The verdicts were unanimous. King Morveth and 12 of his advisors were sentenced to death by hanging using the same method they had employed to murder the human women. The executions would take place on the ceremonial platforms where Ambassador Park and her colleagues had died. The sentences were carried out exactly 1 year after the original executions, with representatives from every human world and dozens of alien species present to witness justice being served. King Morveth faced death with less dignity than the women he had murdered, but received the same mercy he had shown them. President Han spoke at the execution ceremony, and her words were transmitted throughout human space. "They died as diplomats seeking peace between civilizations," she said. "They are avenged as martyrs who showed the galaxy that humanity will protect its own regardless of gender or position." The former Valdorian Empire was reorganized into independent worlds under human protection, with each species given the choice of self-governance or continued association with humanity. Most chose to remain under human authority because they had witnessed both human military power and human justice. Dr. Lim Bo-ra established the Ambassador Park Jiwoo Institute for Interspecies Relations on the former Valdorian capital to ensure that future diplomatic missions would be better prepared for hostile alien cultures. The institute would train diplomats and provide cultural analysis to prevent similar tragedies. Admiral Lee accepted appointment as the first director of the Galactic Justice Commission that would investigate war crimes and protect diplomatic personnel throughout known space. His experience with the Valdorian atrocity made him the ideal candidate to ensure such murders never happened again. Commander O received promotion to admiral and was given command of the first diplomatic protection fleet that would escort future missions to potentially hostile worlds. Her survival of the original mission and her tactical brilliance during the war made her the perfect choice for this critical assignment. Major Park established the Special Justice Corps that would investigate war crimes and capture those responsible for atrocities against human personnel. His successful capture of King Morveth demonstrated the effectiveness of specialized military units trained for justice missions. Captain Shin was awarded command of the new dreadnought engineer Song Ye-jin and tasked with patrolling the former Valdorian territories to ensure that liberated species remained free from oppression. His ship would serve as a mobile symbol of human protection for vulnerable civilizations. The memorial service for the 15 murdered women was held on Earth with their families and colleagues present to honor their sacrifice. President Han delivered the final eulogy while standing before portraits of Ambassador Park, Captain Yoon, Engineer Song, and the 12 other victims of Valdorian hatred. "They came in peace and died for their gender," she concluded. "But their deaths awakened something in humanity that had been sleeping since our ancient wars. The galaxy now knows that we are more than peaceful traders and diplomatic partners. We are guardians of justice who will cross space itself to protect our own." Admiral O led the first post-war diplomatic mission to a previously neutral species that had requested human protection after witnessing the fate of the Valdorian Empire. Her success in negotiating a mutual defense treaty proved that humanity's reputation for both strength and honor would serve them well in future galactic relations. The names of the 15 murdered women were inscribed on monuments throughout human space as reminders that diplomacy must be backed by the strength to protect those who serve in humanity's name. Their sacrifice had purchased not only justice for themselves, but safety for countless future diplomatic missions. The galaxy had learned that attacking human women was the surest way to awaken the full fury of human military power, and that humanity would pursue justice across any distance and through any obstacle to protect their own people regardless of gender or position.